So the first one is, what is the main incentive for making airtightness mandatory? And actually, maybe that's a more general question than for Ireland only. Yes, so Maria, you are showing the question now. Mark, do you want to start answering this question?
Well, I would imagine that the incentive in Ireland for making airtightness mandatory was absolutely would have been European legislation, that there was research had been acknowledged, I think, by the department and by the various decision makers, that the qualitative testing of construction at the end to test the airtight layer shows two things. It's showing that the actual quality of the construction, because if a building is airtight, it's been built far better than one that has, that's very leaky. And it's about the various trades on site understanding that they have to perform to a higher standard and that it's going to be tested. But I suppose there was also a lot of confusion in the marketplace in Ireland about what type of air testing should be done, when it should be done, and by whom. So by making it mandatory, it has taken away an awful lot of confusion.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Walter, you want to say something also about that? Walter?
Yes.
No, you're muted. Okay, maybe you want to say something about the incentive for making airtightness mandatory in Denmark?
We have it's written in what standard you're to use in the building regulations, and what we've done is of course trying to improve the quality of the air testing. It's the mandatory issue. It's difficult because you will always, if you have a quality assurance system like what we are preparing in Denmark for a lot of testers, there will also be testers which don't have any quality assurance system, and that's a problem if the companies they have to compete in getting work in the building industry. I can't give you a clear answer of whether mandatory.
Maybe I can add something actually, because well, there's nothing in the EU legislation that requires airtightness testing, so it's nothing mandatory from the European Union. But on the other hand, because the EU legislation requires the member states to go for nearly zero energy buildings, this means that they have to pay attention to airtightness. And to make the market change, I think it's one way that was adopted in many countries to actually do an airtightness test in order to change the market. So so maybe we can move on to the next question regarding. So is there any legislation surrounding airtightness of ventilation units in the home? So can you answer this, Mark?
In relation to, yes, there is. I suppose there's two types of information that's available. There are requirements that if the ventilation system is in, it should be below a certain level of airtightness. But typically, it's the manufacturer's requirement in order for the mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery to work within a controlled atmosphere. We will generally ask if a unit has been installed, what is the target that the manufacturer is looking for before we go out to test. Because in our experience, if it's a poor air leakage test and the problem after the fact is identified that the mechanical ventilation system is not performing as it should do, quite often, once it's been realised that there was a poor air leakage test done, the manufacturers of the mechanical ventilation systems understandably will turn around and say, well, look, our system can't work outside of a controlled atmosphere. So it's important that the builder or the homeowner, when they're building the dwelling, understands that there has to be an improved level of airtightness in order for the mechanical ventilation system to work properly.
Okay, and then there's another question for you, Mark, I guess. When tests are specified for commercial building, how often is this tester certification required?
Well, at the moment, the testing scheme that we have to be recertified every year. Okay? And then there's sort of two-year certification on fans and manometers. So we will have to be audited and recertified every 12 months.
Yes, but I think the question is, you mentioned in your presentation that for commercial buildings sometimes there's airtightness testing as well, but the certification is not required in that case. Is that correct?
No, that's correct, but the certification scheme that's there at the moment means that with a single fan, if you're a member of this testing scheme, you can test a commercial building, but it's not part of the building regulations at the moment. There are new commercial building regulations coming out next year, and possibly it will also be made mandatory then. But the question is how often?
Yes, but then do building owners actually require the certification on a voluntary basis, I would say?
Well, I think because there is a certification scheme there, I think if a building owner was building a new building, and if the architect or engineer is involved, I would say in probably 90% of cases, they would look to someone who was on this certification scheme rather than a tester who wasn't certified. I can't guarantee that, but that would be my feeling, because we do get calls and we do test commercial buildings.
Okay, well, thank you. That's interesting. It brings more business for them.